Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the After School Special series of webinars. These are targeted towards educators with relevance towards brain injury. Today's topic is teen dating violence, what it looks like and what to do. The following webinar is being recorded, and we ask that you provide your feedback as well as any suggestions for future topics following this session. So I'd like to introduce to you our speaker, Kristen Faisal, the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, where she has worked for several years, since 1995. Prior to that, she did crisis intervention and advocacy for survivors of domestic abuse and received a bachelor's degree in anthropology. She provides information, strategies, and best practices to agencies that intersect with survivors of domestic abuse and works on public policy to address survivor needs. She is trained for the Iowa Department of Human Services, Iowa Department of Public Health, Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, and numerous other public and private agencies on the state and national level. Kristen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you for those of you who are actually listening live and for those of you who are going to tune in or download or whatever or podcast this later, depending on what your technological thrill is. This is called, my subheading here is good news, and that often surprises people. But what I would like to say is we actually know so much, not only about dating violence amongst teens, but also about what helps. And that's the good news. So I want you to come along with me, and I'm sure that by the time we're done, you will have picked up some really specific things that you can do so that you don't feel quite so overwhelmed if you should feel worried about a student or a family member, and that you'll have something really practical to do. So dating violence amongst teens is a very real issue at this point and has been for some time, depending on what study you look at, of course, and how they define what counts as dating violence and what doesn't. You'll see anything from 9% to 65% of teens experiencing some sort of partner violence. The Centers for Disease Control pretty much have put it down to about 22% amongst high school students and about 32% amongst college students. And young people actually do have the highest rates of intimate partner violence compared to all across the lifespan. So as I said, we know a lot about abusers. I'm going to talk about that first because I always think it's important to start with what the problem is. We know a lot about survivors, and we know a lot about what helps. So that's what we're going to talk about. First of all, we know that folks who abuse their partners, even though people will say, oh, he or she is just crazy, or, well, it's, they drink too much, or they use too much, or they got anger issues, we know that it isn't actually any of those things. We have taken folks who are abusive and we've put them in anger management classes, and then all we had was calm, happy batterers. We've taken folks who were abusive and we've put them through substance abuse treatment. And again, even though they might have gotten to a point where they were sober, the abusive behaviors never went away. What they do have a problem with, or what they have, is a particular belief system. And once you get this piece, everything else falls into place. So let's talk about the belief system in a little bit of depth. And I'm going to narrate this just in case there are folks who aren't actually looking at a screen as they are hearing this. But let's say you have your average person walking down the street, okay? And there's this little bubble around the average person, which represents the sense of their rights. This is what I'm entitled to in a relationship. This is my responsibilities in a relationship. It really is about entitlement. So this is my map of what I get, what I'm supposed to do, what I can expect, how we get along, what the rules of relationship are. Okay, so imagine me with a little bubble, let's say it's a foot around me. And then you take somebody who is a batterer, And the bubble around them about their sense of their rights is huge. And their bubble intrudes upon their partner's bubble. So their sense of what they get to expect, what they're entitled to, their rights, how they are treated, is much larger than their intimate partner and trumps their intimate partner. So I get what I get when I want it. And I have the right to expect and demand those things. I'm better than you, and therefore I get to be treated better than you. This really is ultimately what sets everything else in motion, and everything else that we know about batters comes from this. So a lot of times people say, well, batters have a problem with anger. I already mentioned that. Well, if you were being treated, if you thought that you deserved this huge bubble of entitlements, and instead your partner was giving you a bubble that was pretty much the same size as theirs, and your parents were saying, no, actually, this is all you get, or the marriage counselor, or the law enforcement officer said, no, actually, you don't get to do that, or the judge, you would probably feel cheated. Like, how come I'm not getting my rights? How come I'm not getting what is due to me? You would feel cheated. You would feel angry. And so it isn't that batters batter because they are angry. They are angry because they are batterers. It's the belief system that generates those feelings of, I'm frustrated, I'm being treated poorly, they're doing this horrible thing to me, all of that. And so then the behavior comes from those feelings of being cheated somehow. Another thing about this is, when I think about what I'm entitled to in my intimate, my rules for relationship with my intimate partner, those rules of relationship look very different than the rules of relationship with, say, a coworker or a child or a neighbor or friends. There are some similarities, but there are a lot of differences. And so that makes sense then when you think that batters have those differences too. So their sense of entitlement around their intimate partner may be very different than the way they feel they're allowed to treat a coworker or allowed to treat a friend. And so it's not surprising that when you talk to coworkers or friends or whatever, they say, I can't believe that they would do that. I can't believe he or she would treat somebody that way. They never act that way to me. Well, of course not. Just like I don't treat my neighbor and have the same expectations of my neighbor as I do my intimate partner. So, so once you kind of get this picture in your head, this model of a batterer's belief system and how that rules the way they function, suddenly everything kind of makes sense. So how do batters, what is it that they do to enact that belief system? And so the next slide is called the power and control wheel. This particular one that I'm showing you is specifically written for teens. If you Google power and control wheel, you will find a ton of all different kinds of them, and several different teen power and control wheels. So if you're trying to squint at this and say, I can't read that, don't worry about it. Google it. You'll get lots of other options, and probably this exact one too. And basically this is the batterer's modus operandi. These are the strategies that they use to get control over their partner. Because if I want what I want when I want it, and I feel I'm entitled to do that, then I need to control you to make sure that that happens. So that is ultimately the central goal. I want control over my partner. And strategies include all kinds of things that are threatening and intimidating. Things like, if you leave me, if you report me to the police, I will spread these nasty rumors around the school about you. If you go out with your friends on Saturday night, I'm going to take that picture that you sent me topless, and I'm going to send that around the school. Those examples and more. One of the things that we're finding as far as these tactics is how teens are ahead of us quite often in technology anyway, and batterers are right there, taking that new technology that we are running to catch up with and using that as not a different tool in the toolbox, but maybe one that works a little faster. So I can, in the past, if I was going to use intimidation, I might have to do something else. Now I can just use the cell phone. So what you'll see when you look at this is all kinds of things. Excluding and isolating people, controlling where does my partner go, who do they get to talk to, what are they wearing. I'm going to check and see who they've been texting. I'm going to get their passwords, and I'm going to go through their email. Using social status, minimizing, denying, and blaming. I don't know what you're talking about. That didn't happen. You make stuff up. Well, yeah, but it's not like I hit you or anything. Or, well, yeah, maybe I hit you, but you deserved it. And so all of these other, shall we say, nonviolent behaviors are held in by the physical and sexual violence, which kind of gives this wheel energy. Because once, as a perpetrator, once I've crossed over that line and my victim knows that I am willing to go that extra step, all that stuff in the middle works really, really good. And it can be very subtle, and it can be coded. It can be just little sentences that only, my victim and I understand. To really understand the power of how subtle some of this can be, my mother never laid a hand on us. She really didn't. But I can tell you that when she used my middle name, if she said Kirsten Diane through the teeth, with the kind of very, not raising her voice, just through the clenched teeth, Kirsten Diane, I automatically knew with the look that whatever I was doing, I was right up on the line, and I needed to back off immediately. And I did. So she had this amazing control over all of us with just our middle name through the teeth. And some of you might be having a similar experience to that in your own life. Oh, and one thing before I move on from that power and control wheel, that I want to make very clear is that these tactics are used by both male and female perpetrators. The results on the victim, whether male or female, are very, very similar. We see these very same tactics used in gay and lesbian relationships. So they use them because they work. They work, they work, they work. And much of it is not against the law. When people think of domestic abuse, when they think of dating violence, when they think of intimate partner violence or any of the other names, even the name battering and violence just conjures up a closed fist. It doesn't conjure up, including in the perpetrator's mind and in the victim's mind, all of these much, much more subtle things. So knowing the power and control wheel, I think, is key. So that's my very brief, here's what the problem is that we know. And we're no longer, because we now have this model of both the tactics and the sense of belief system as far as to why it happens and what the perpetrator's goal is going to be accomplished, we no longer have to be fooled into things like, oh, we'll just send them to anger management. We know those things are not going to work. And we're not going to fall into the batterer's excuses. Oh, well, I'm just this way because I have low self-esteem. Well, no, actually what you have is intrusive self-esteem. You think that you're better than your partner and you have the right to treat them this way. That's not low self-esteem. So let's move on to talking a little bit about the survivor. There's, again, lots of myths about who enters into relationships with an abusive person and who doesn't. And what we really, in fact, know about who is at risk to be abused in an intimate relationship is simply females. That females within United States culture are at far greater risk than any other particular category of being abused. So it isn't about, well, that person has low self-esteem and so they think they deserve it. Often people have average or high or low or whatever self-esteem before they enter these relationships, but when they come out the other end, yes, they have low self-esteem. So it's kind of like looking at somebody who has little red dots all over them saying, well, they're at risk for getting chicken pox because, look, they've got chicken pox. Self-esteem is a result, not necessarily a precursor. We look at folks and say, well, she was raised in a family where she saw this happening, where her dad was a batterer, and so she thinks that's normal in relationships. But there are just as many folks who were raised in families that did not have that experience, who are injured, harmed, abused by their intimate partner. So we know that it can be anybody. There's no particular profile of who will be a victim. We know that a lot of the lists that are given to young girls as I've seen lots of red flag lists that are supposed to somehow protect you. What I find fascinating about those lists is they're almost always things that she would not know unless she was already in a relationship with that person. So they'll have things like they're constantly jealous of you, or they are, you know, it's never their fault when something happens, it's always yours, or you got involved and too serious too quick. How would you even know those things unless you were already in a relationship with an abusive person? That might help somebody decide whether or not the relationship is a healthy one or not, but it isn't necessarily helpful for avoiding being in a relationship with someone. So we know can be anybody. It can be the person you least expect. And the other thing we know is that survivors are very, very good at hiding what is happening to them for lots of reasons, because of shame, because they love their partner and they don't want them to get into trouble, because they feel trapped, because the partner has threatened their families if they tell, all kinds of things. And we know that when you're talking about youth, there are additional barriers that they face simply because of their age. One of the key ones is that we often do not take young people's relationships seriously. Well, that's just puppy love. Well, that's just an infatuation. Well, that's just. And because we often don't take their relationships seriously, we don't take the abuse within them as seriously either. And we think that it is, well, it's not like you live together, it's not like you have a child in common, it's not like you're married or anything, so just leave. So we don't take their relationships as seriously, we don't take the abuse as seriously, and we don't consider how serious the risks and barriers are that they face in getting out of those relationships and being safe. And we know that for folks who experience that, it can have long-term impacts on their health, on their economic survival and future, you name it. So certainly, when you are being abused, it's likely to affect your school or work performance. It's very hard to focus when you have this other tremendously big thing happening in your life. And the other thing that happens is that abusers will specifically focus on attacking that. If that's a sense of self-esteem, if I'm, you know, one of the things that makes me feel proud is that I'm a great student, then my batterer might keep me up and out all night completely against my will the night before the big test to make sure that I don't do well on it. Oh, you think you're so smart. You think you're better than the rest of us. Well, I'll show you. So those, you know, school or work performance might suffer because it's not your focus right now and you're stressed and you're exhausted because of trauma, and also because you have somebody who may be directly working to make sure you don't succeed in those areas. Another huge risk for young people is their reputation and their peer relationships. And I don't have to tell you how key peer relationships are as folks are trying to figure out who am I and who am I in relationship to other people and how do I deserve to be treated. And if I have somebody who is on a campaign of teaching me and controlling me and saying that I am not worth respect, I am not worth being treated as an equal, everything is my fault and I'm to blame for when I am hurt, that's a huge learning experience at a very critical learning experience point in their lives. When I talk about the long-term risks, particularly with economic and education goals, so maybe you impact that one test, but maybe you impact where I end up going to college. Maybe I end up getting pregnant. Maybe that completely sidetracks the plan that I had for my life. And there are risks to family because let's say that somebody is abusing me and they really want to get to me, and I'm at this point of going, well, I'm not afraid anymore, whatever, do what you want. I might get numb to what's happening, but one place that I will continue to be vulnerable is if you threaten those that are nearest and dearest to me, the people that I love. One of the things in the Elizabeth Smart case, which was not a case of dating violence, but is very instructive, one of the key ways that he controlled her was not to say, I will hurt you, but if you don't do everything I tell you, I will hurt your family. And just to refresh your memory, Elizabeth Smart was the teenager in Utah who a few years ago was kidnapped in the middle of the night out of her bedroom and held for about 9 months. And her perpetrator was smart, knowing that the threat to her family was a far better risk because of her loyalty and her love than to threaten her directly. Let's zero in, since this is part of a healthcare topic, a series on traumatic brain injury. Let's zero in a little bit more on the physical health risks. Certainly, if you are experiencing your arm being twisted behind your back constantly, being kicked in the stomach constantly, you name it, there's a very high risk there for permanent injuries and for chronic pain. And then when we talk about things like STIs, sexually transmitted infections, abusive boys are 3 times as likely to have a sexually transmitted disease as non-abusive boys. And of those girls who go to be tested for STIs and HIV, about 40% of them have experienced intimate partner violence. So what we find is boys are more likely to have an infection, and the girls who are in relationship with them know that they are at greater risk and are more likely to go get tested because they are scared. Girls who are in abusive relationships are 3.5 times more likely to get pregnant. And that, again, is a big risk as far as sidetracking their economic survival, their career, their life. They may not be ready to be a parent at that point. And then there's the peer response to, oh my gosh, you have an STI, oh my gosh, you're HIV positive, oh my gosh, you are pregnant, you name it. When we look at specifically physical assaults, people might think of, in terms of traumatic brain injury, just being hit in the head or having, like being slammed up against a wall so that the back of your head hits the wall. But a lot of these things may involve shaking. So you would have your brain being sloshed around in your skull. Strangulation is a very high-risk physical assault that can happen in high-risk abusive relationships. Anything that's going to cut off oxygen to your brain is likely to have some long-term damages. And there are actually physical changes in the brain, particularly in your hippocampus and your amygdala, that are due to long-term stressors and trauma, things that are part and parcel of post-traumatic stress disorder and some other long-term brain damage, if you will, that is actually chemically induced from your body being constantly exposed to the rush of adrenaline and other fight, flight, freeze, stress reactions. There's not a lot of research that specifically looks at young people and who are being battered, or even adult battered women, and rates of traumatic brain injury. This is kind of a new field that here in Iowa, as elsewhere in the nation, we are embarking on. Some of the initial stuff that I was able to find amongst battered women of all ages in a hospital setting that were screened, they found that about 67% of those that they were screening were showing up as positive for possible traumatic brain injury and were then referred for further investigation. And about 30% of battered women in a hospital setting were saying that they had lost consciousness at some point during that assault. And that is certainly one of the red flags that there might be some long-term issues. That really, that 67% possible, we did kind of a non-formal survey last year in Iowa amongst the different clients of the domestic abuse programs in Iowa, and about 60% of the folks that they ended up screening came up with possible traumatic brain injuries and referred for further investigation of that. So that's pretty darn high, if you ask me. That's certainly something that we should have been paying attention to a lot longer, and I'm very glad that we're kind of on this boat now. So that is my very quick outline of what the problem all is and the impacts on the victims. So let's then spend the rest of the time talking about, okay, what are we supposed to do? And one thing that I often tell people is never be afraid to raise the topic, never be afraid to ask. But even though I say that, I would take the words like abuse and battering and dating violence and teen violence and all those and avoid them. Those words come stacked with lots of stereotypes and lots of emotional stuff attached. People don't want to claim or own those names, so I wouldn't use those. Instead, I would talk about really specific behaviors, and here's where it helps to have that teen power and control wheel and ask questions around the wheel. So the PowerPoint that of this has lots of sample questions, and there's a PDF of it and the PowerPoint available, and folks are always welcome to contact the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence, my office, and get a copy too of just sample questions to engage in the conversation. So avoid those specific words, but ask about behaviors. And one thing that you can do to even open the conversation is just universalize. You know, this is so common. There are so many young people that struggle with figuring out what is a healthy relationship and what is not. I talk about this with many of my students, or all of my students. Something to make it, I didn't just pick you out because I'm worried about you. Then as you have conversations, does your relationship seem like it got serious really fast? What are some of the ways you feel like your partner treats you with respect? Does your partner ever make you feel bad about yourself or put you down? Does your partner support you spending time with your family or friends? Sometimes one person in a relationship does things that are hurtful to the other. Are there things happening that are hurtful to you? That's a very generic, not are you a victim of dating violence, but are there things happening that are hurtful? That's an easy question that can lead to much deeper discussion so that that person discloses what they feel comfortable disclosing. Do you feel like you respect each other's privacy? And there's a great place to ask about, well, let's talk about texting or cell phones or Facebook. You know, do you exchange passwords? You know, how does that all work? Is there ever lots of drama to try and stop you from going somewhere or talk to your friends or from doing your homework? Do you feel like your partner is always angry with you or that you're always in trouble with them? You know, what things happen that make you in trouble with them? Has he or she ever hurt you or made you do something you didn't want to do? How comfortable are you telling them no? And what are you worried might happen if you do say no? What happens when you disagree? Who makes most of the decisions in your relationship? How does that work? And if one of you, doesn't like that, then what happens? So these are very generic. They're very mild. Some of them can move in a little bit deeper. Have you ever changed what you wore, who you were out with, where you went, because you didn't want to make your partner mad? Do you ever feel scared of them? So those questions and many more, again, having the power and control wheel and being able to ask. And I have the power and control wheel quite memorized, but as an advocate, I always had a stack of them with me at all times. And if it seemed like I was getting some yeses to those initial questions, I would whip one of those out and I'd put it in front of the person and say, I want you to take a look at this. And, are there things on there that look familiar to you? And what would happen if it was familiar to that person was this amazing aha experience. And they would almost always say, where did you get this? Who wrote this? How is somebody seeing my life? And they would be shocked to know that it wasn't just them. They weren't the only one. And shocked to know that abuse, battering, dating violence, domestic violence, that it was more than just a fist, that it was all these other things that they didn't have a name for. And suddenly there were words to describe their experience. So I would love it if the pound control wheel was plastered everywhere at all times, so that people could see what we were really talking about and be able to name and talk about their experience. Some important messages to tell survivors: hey, I'm afraid. I'm afraid for your safety, and these are the reasons why I'm afraid. These are the specific things that I've seen that make me worried. I'm here for you. What can I do for you? You tell me what you want. I mean, that person is already being told a lot of what they should do and what they must do, and there's lots of people always willing to give advice. So when you're intervening, it's, hey, what would be helpful to you? You're the leader. You're the expert on your situation. Tell me what would be good. You don't deserve to be abused. I don't care how awful you are. I don't care if you got drunk that night. I don't care if you left that party with somebody else. I don't care if. It doesn't matter. You might have had bad behavior. You might have done things that weren't such a good partner thing, but you didn't deserve the abuse. Acknowledge the courage when people are willing to talk to you. That's very hard to self-disclose. And they are amazing. For me, one of the biggest benefits of working in the domestic abuse realm for the last couple of decades has been that I have the opportunity to witness courage on a regular basis. And I am always awed and stunned by it. And I think that's a really important message. The fact that you get up and you come to school and you do all of this and you are maintaining, knowing that you are dealing with this over here, this really complex issue, is amazing. And you are brilliant, and you are strong, and you are brave. And so thank you for sharing that with me. That's another big one. What it's not helpful to say is, I don't understand why you're with that person. I don't understand why you put up with it. I can't believe that you would think that was okay. All of that stuff questions their judgment yet again, which is just feeding into what the batterer is telling them. And they're going to get defensive. Similarly, you will get a defensive reaction every time you say, well, they're just a jerk, well, they're being, if you name call, it's one thing to say that was bad behavior or that's not healthy relationship behavior, but when you name call, then the defenses go up and you don't get anywhere. Things like, well, can you figure out how to not set your partner off? Can you figure out how to not make them mad so they don't hurt you? Really suggests that the control of the abuse lies with that victim, and that's simply not true. That victim, sometimes all they're doing is breathing, and that's all it takes. You are an appropriate target for me to treat you this way, and I'm going to do it whether you are complying with my demand or not, because I feel like it. So all of this suggests that you are somehow sitting there in a classroom and you're seeing some behaviors that make you concerned, or maybe you overheard a conversation in the hallway between a couple and that made you feel concerned, or you see some bruises. But one of the absolute best screening tools that we know, one of the best interventions that we know, is simply universal education. Some really great recent research in reproductive health care clinic settings where rather than focusing on, I'm going to pick out which people I think might be being abused and screen them and talk to them, instead they just spoke to every single client. What they found is if they just did universal education, just here's what happens, here's what abusive, unhealthy relationships look like, and here's some intervention and some ideas if this is happening to you or a friend, that just that education piece, that victims were 60% more likely to end relationships because they felt that they were unsafe or unhealthy for them. So whether that person acknowledged anything or not, whether they felt that it was a personal conversation about them or not, just getting the information, just hearing about unhealthy relationships and how that could impact them and what those behaviors looked like, made people safer. So that's a really big thing. You never have to take somebody aside personally and talk about these issues with them if you don't want to. You can make a vast impact on this issue simply by providing education, which is what you do every day. You're already an expert in that. So well, one of the things about webinars is they really are this talking head, which sometimes you don't even see. In this case, you don't even see me, just pouring information into your brain. So I'd like to stop for just a second and ask you to do a mental exercise with me, so at least there's something that you're doing in response to this material. And that is just make a list in your head or jot it down on your desk or quickly code it into your phone, whatever, a temporary short list of the 5 most important things in your life. Now, if you have 5 kids, you can't cheat and write down 5 names. My children is 1 item. So it could be specific, people, family, friends. It could be your career. It could be a hope or a dream that you have. I'm going to be the next great American author. It could be a specific physical item, this family heirloom, my home. It could be a pet. It could be your health. It could be your spirituality. So any of the 5 most important things in your life. And hopefully as I'm talking, you at least have come up with 3. So I want you to either look at or think about your list, and I want you to cross off the thing that you would be willing to give up to avoid having somebody call you nasty names. You got that? Have you figured out who's gone forever or what is gone forever out of your life? And I'm guessing that there's probably quite a few people, because I've done this a lot in real life, who look at me and say, there's no way, I'm not willing to, for something like that, I'm not willing to give any of these things up. They're important to me. So let's step it up a bit. Cross off the thing that you would give up in order to avoid being slapped across the face. And if you still can't decide, we'll step it up again. Cross off the thing that you would give up in order to avoid being shaken and slammed against the wall several times and thrown to the floor. Cross off the thing that you would give up in order to avoid having somebody break your arm. Cross off the thing that you would give up in order to avoid having somebody break your jaw. Cross off the thing that you would give up in order to avoid having somebody sexually assault you. And cross off the thing that you would give up in order to avoid being killed. So there might be some things that you have crossed off at this point. For many people, there is still at least one item that they're looking at saying, no, even if I might be killed, I'm not willing to give that up. My children are one of those items for me. Right? And it's not even a question. Would I die for my kids? Yes, of course. I don't have to think about that. So this is very instructive because when you are being abused, you have a list of the things that are most important to you. And you're looking at your list and you're saying, okay, if I stop this relationship, if I leave this abusive person, do I get to keep what's most important to me? And if I stay with them, do I get to keep what's most important to me? And the thing about when you're in a relationship with a batterer is that the answer is it depends. And it might depend from day to day, whether I get to keep what's most important to me, whether I stay in that relationship with them or whether I leave them. So for any scenario that you can come up with, I can come up with why in one case it might be better to stay to get to keep that, or in somebody else's case, it might be better to leave to get that thing that is most important to them. So when you're talking about safety planning, and again, if you were to Google safety plan, you would come up with a lot of really good checklists, but the checklists are often about being physically assaulted. Change your locks, if you're being followed, take 3 turns in the same direction and see if they're still behind you, and then drive to the closest police station. Get a restraining order. There are things like that. What I would say is when we think about safety planning, while those lists, as I said, they're wonderful, they can be very helpful, and it's great to do that planning. So to me, it's kind of like doing a fire drill. We do planning and we do practicing. We make sure that we have fire ladders on 2nd stories. We learn to stop, drop, and roll. Those are great. And to me, those safety plans that you Google are very much like that, and we need to have those for what do I do in a critical incident. But if we're looking long term, we need to think about some other things. We need to think a little bit broader than how do I not get hit, or what do I do the next time I'm hit. And so I want you to think about three realms that are involved in kind of this more broad perspective of safety planning. And one of them is the risk that the abuser poses. Every time they're mad at me because I didn't wear the right thing to school, or I talked to some boy I wasn't supposed to talk to, they shake me and they scream at me and they slam me up against the lockers. So there's a very real abuser risk. But there's also all of this other stuff, because relationships don't exist in isolation. So any one particular person, they have the risk that the abuser is posing to them, but they're also carrying around a load of a lot of other stuff going on in life. So maybe, I'm being slammed up against the locker by my boyfriend, but then at home, maybe I have a parent who's an alcoholic, or maybe I have a special needs siblings, or maybe I'm experiencing racism or anti-immigrant sentiment in town. You name it. There's a lot of just life stressors that the abuser didn't cause, but work in the abuser's favor as far as wearing their victim down, isolating their victim, and often making them feel like they deserve it, that this is just one more thing. So any particular person is always carrying these 2 piles of risks or barriers to safety, right? And then the third realm that I want you to think about is all of their coping skills, the things that make them resilient in the face of these other 2 areas of life. And some people are simply naturally more resilient by attitude, by lots of psychosocial factors. Other people are more brittle. Some people, when they enter into an abusive relationship, have a lot of resources, both personal and community resources and family resources. Other people, when they enter this relationship, their resources are already strained, or they never had a chance to learn coping skills, and they come in at a very different level. So these things interact to create what that person's barriers are. And what I would suggest to you is we can work in any of these realms to help make that person's help to make them better off and help to make them safer. So there are things we might be able to do to deal with the abuser risks. We might be able to have a safety plan in the school where they're not in the same classroom together, or they get a protection order, or they are have somebody accompany them to their car. You name it. So there's things we can do there in that realm. There's things that you might be able to do with life stressors. Maybe they need to be hooked up to a counselor. Maybe if the family is experiencing something, they need they need help from AEA. There might be larger family issues that if some kind of assistance or pressure could be relieved there, get them into family counseling, then the person has more space and more breathing room and more energy to deal with the abuser issues. And then that gets to resiliency and coping. If you can't affect either of those 2 realms, your hands are tied. What can you do that will strengthen that person and provide them with an additional coping skill, provide them with an emotional safety net, you name it. So when you're safety planning, you can either decrease the risks caused by the abuser, you can decrease their life stressors, or you can increase resiliency and coping. And those are actually ranked in terms of from hardest to easiest. In other words, you will have a real hard time controlling that abuser's behavior. The victim has a real hard time controlling that abuser's behavior. And I can guarantee you that the court systems, law enforcement, probation, you name it, everybody has a very hard time controlling that abuser's behavior. The only person who has control over that abuser's behavior is that abuser. So we are all, as interveners and as the victim, limited in what we can do in that realm. The next realm is decreasing life stressors, and sometimes, you know, you can't wave your magic wand and make poverty go away, or you can't wave your magic wand and, you know, ta-da, now your parent no longer struggles with clinical depression. But there might be some things you can do, and certainly there's more avenues for, let's bring in some different resources. Let's give referrals. The place that you and that victim has the most ability to maneuver and to do something about their situation is increasing their coping skills and their resiliency. So, you know, what can they do? They can get into a support group. They can read books that are about domestic abuse where they hear that other people have had similar experiences, and it's not about them. It's not their fault. They can do things that simply make them happy and make them feel worthwhile. They can pursue a passion. You can figure out what they are really good at and help them to achieve that. If you have somebody who the way they deal with what's happening is they draw or they write out their trauma, assist them to entering a contest, assist them to getting their work published, you name it, to give them a sense of ownership and pride that would buoy them up in the face of these other challenges. Teens can absolutely get reproductive health care, and they can do it without a parent's consent or knowledge. So if I don't want my parent to know that I'm having sex, willingly or unwillingly, with my boyfriend, I still can go and get tested. I can go and get birth control. Those things are available to me. I can get screened for a traumatic brain injury. I have been strangled 3 times. I'm scared. I don't know what to do about this. I can call. I can call and find out what services might be available, what that might look like, I can get information so I'm not so scared, so I know what to look for, so I know what symptoms might mean, so I can get tied into resources. I cannot on my own, as a minor, go and get a restraining order. I have to have a parent or guardian get one on my behalf. But I can have that conversation with a parent or guardian, and maybe I can absolutely get the information and see what the process is like, see what I have to fill out, find out what I would have to say in the courtroom to a judge, find out what would happen at a hearing, and maybe practice with a trusted adult or somebody else what that conversation with my parent might look like. I can figure out safe places at school or at work. Again, maybe I need to make sure that I always have a friend who walks me to my car so I'm not alone after school. If I do feel scared, where are the safe places in town that I can go? If I'm, let my work know that this is happening. And if my partner keeps coming in and harassing me while I'm there at the cash register or whatever, have my workplace intervene to tell them that they're trespassing and they're not allowed on the premises. One thing I can absolutely do as a teenager is talk to safe people and encourage them to keep the conversation open so they are not isolated, so somebody knows what's going on with them. And just like we talk with small kids about stranger danger and having a password, so if somebody comes and says, hey, your mom told me to pick you up, get in the car, they know that unless that person has the code word that their mom did not send them, same thing. You can have signals and passwords. So if I call you up and I tell you that I'm really hungry for an Oreo malt, you know that I'm in trouble and you need to call my folks or you need to call the police and you need to do something to send me help. So, that's not something that the batterer is going to know, that I'm suddenly texting Oreo malt to my best friend. That's not suspicious, but I and my best friend know what that means. I can have a spare cell phone. Any cell phone. It doesn't have to have a plan on it. Any old cell phone that has got a charge, so it does have to have a good battery, any old cell phone will dial 911. So one of the things that is really common is for a batterer to take the cell phone away. So having a spare cell phone that I can pull out and call 911, that's a great thing, and I don't have to pay for it. I can just use my old one that there's no line on it anymore. Carrying spare keys, medication, let people know where I'm going to be, what my plans are, when I'm coming back, changing my passwords, changing my usernames, and even though when I get something from my batterer that makes me embarrassed or ashamed or furious and all I want to do is get rid of it and destroy it and not look at it again, I can keep all of that stuff as potential evidence for a restraining order case or a criminal case. I can take care of myself, eat better, sleep better, exercise. I can journal, I can dance, I can volunteer so I feel good about myself and my ability to give to other people and what I have to offer the world. I can do anything to garden, to de-stress, to ride horses, to you name it. Have quiet time, to just be alone with my thoughts. There are tons of things that increase resiliency that survivor has power over, even in the face of not being able to escape their abuser. And so no matter what, even if you feel your hands are tied in those other two realms, that is a realm there's lots of space to work in to help folks to be safer. And certainly you and your survivor can surf the internet. There's lots of great organizations and websites out there specifically aimed at youth. Love is Respect, and they've got great, easy-to-remember titles. Love is Respect, Break the Cycle, That's Not Cool, The Safe Space, No More, Say More, Love is Not Abuse. If somebody is needing reproductive health care, they can call and find a Title X clinic where they can get that for free. Planned Parenthood or the National Family Planning and Reproductive Health Association will help them find a Title X clinic. They can talk to an advocate, somebody in my field, confidential, anonymous, pick up the phone. You don't have to tell them anything about who you are or where you're calling from. And you can get safety planning, you can get information, you can find out what your rights are, you can find out how to help a friend, find out how to help a student. You can get all kinds of safety planning and support. If you don't know where to call to do all of that, you can go to ICADV, that stands for Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence.org. That's my organization. That website, and find the program that serves your area. And here's another easy-to-remember name, Iowa Victim Services, one word, iowavictimservices.org. And again, look right in there and find all of the sexual assault and domestic abuse programs in Iowa. And that, I am out of time. So that right there is the end of my presentation. I don't know if folks have questions. Here's your chance to chat, type them. I'm going to hand the control back to Julie, or actually she's going to have to take control back away from me.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Okay.
It was great information. Let's see. I will put up here a site where you can go, let's see, to provide your feedback on this session, and then also, where you can go for to provide feedback about this session, and then also where to find additional webinars that we have archived on our website through the Department of Public Health. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to raise your hand or to type them in the question box. Okay, and I'm not seeing anything pop up, so I think we can go ahead and end the session. Thank you again, Kirsten, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.